And welcome to the studios of Community Media Network for tonight's live town hall meeting, Medical Marijuana Revisited. Hello, I'm Charlie Langton tonight, your host, and we're going to be talking about medical marijuana, the good, the bad, and the ugly about what's going on in this world of medical marijuana. We'd like you to participate in our program. Call us now at 248-589-7778, or you can log in to the OaklandPress.com. Let me introduce the panelists real quick who will participate for the next half hour. Rick Thompson, he's with Medical Marijuana Magazine. Michael Comorn is a defense attorney. Bill Dwyer, he's with the Oakland County Commissioner and a former police chief of Farmington Hills. Gerald Fisher, professor of law at Cooley Law School. Neil Rockine, a criminal defense attorney. And Chuck Semchina, a regular on this panel with the Royal Oak Commission. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. This event is sponsored by Community Media Network and the Oakland Press. I thought it was interesting that the Oakland Press, in an editorial yesterday, the title of which was medical, it didn't even say medical, it said marijuana should not have been legalized. Rick Thompson, according to the Oakland Press editorial, they say, and I quote, "There are no scientific peer-reviewed studies that show marijuana reduces chronic pain." Do you agree with that?
I totally do not agree with that, and I sure wish they'd called me for a quote before they put that in the paper. There are quite a few different medical studies that support the efficacy of medical marijuana. One great source that anybody can access online would be a list called Granny Stormcrow's List. If you Google it, Granny Storm Crow, it's an individual person that put together a list of about 2,500 different medical studies. These are scientific studies, double-blind, very high-end, from Nature, from the physiological journals.
Are these peer-reviewed studies?
Peer-reviewed studies.
By
yes,
doctors, real doctors?
If you can't get it in Nature magazine if it's not a peer-reviewed study.
Chuck Semchia, apparently there are studies, and it may be a moot point anyway since the voters voted this. Are you still of the opinion that there's no benefit at all for medical marijuana?
Well, what's apparent is that with 100,000 registration cards out there and the profile of the holders of those cards being many of them, 95% of them being young adults complaining about minor aches and pains, it's very clear that the majority of this marijuana is not being used for real medical benefits. It's more for recreational drug use purposes.
Charlie, I watched the show the last time,
Neil.
and I swore when I came on this show I wasn't going to let anybody talk about in generalities and vagaries. So Chuck can reach for any documentation he wants. I'm pretty sure unless he's hanging out at compassion clubs and dispensaries and he's actually meeting with patients, the people that I represent, some of whom are even in this audience, are cancer patients. There are patients of all different varieties. There are people who suffer from multiple sclerosis who had absolutely no remedy or relief.
But Neil.
Hold on, let me say one thing, Charlie. The idea that we're going to sit here and talk about medical marijuana, and we're going to talk about it as though in generalities. I don't want to talk about generalities. Let's talk about the specifics. There are people, if medical marijuana benefits one person, then you know what? God bless us and the voters for having approved it and giving that one person relief. And I thank him, and I'll thank him again, and I'll fight for every single one of those people.
Chuck Semchia?
Well, thank you, Charlie. I was interrupted in the middle there.
I may do it again if he starts talking in generalities.
The specifics are in my hand.
got the
The
supporting
newspapers have
You're holding up the Free Press. A conservative person holding up the Free Press. I love that.
It's
And
a
there's your
beautiful
source.
thing.
Okay.
And not even the paper that's sponsoring our show.
I'll get to the Oakland Press.
That's okay.
But
The
Charlie,
Oakland Press doesn't like it. No,
Charlie,
Professor Fisher.
but-
go
wait
ahead.
a minute.
The biggest point here is that there are some people who believe they can receive benefits from marijuana. I don't dispute that. The problem with this law is that 99% of the users, in my mind, and what's documented in by quotes from
They abuse it. All the
they
users abuse it?
And it's a law that's all-encompassing. Maybe it helps a few small people, but it certainly is harmful because of the other
Professor,
secondary
Don't
effects.
we want to get on the track of reality here? The headline says legalization. This bill, this Medical Marijuana Act, does not legalize marijuana. Basically, the act was drafted as somewhat of an insidious attempt to legalize
Don't
it.
say that either.
Hold
Don't say
on,
that either.
quit interrupting
Don't-
here.
don't
Quit
point- don't
interrupting.
point at me. Don't
Well,
say
then I'll
that
start
either.
interrupting. If the word insidious act comes
Don't
out,
say that
I'll have
either.
to jump in
Don't
from
say
this
that
side of the
either.
table.
Don't
Well,
read into the intent of the
well,
people
wait a
that
minute,
drafted
wait a
it.
minute.
But there was
And
nothing
don't-
about
No, no,
legalization
that's
of
not-
medical marijuana.
I
I thought it was
can't- I
only
can't
for
read
medical
into it.
purposes only,
No,
though.
I
that's
can't
not
read
right.
in their
That's not
intent
right.
because it's very clear that the drafter of this statute from Washington, D.C. works for a lobbyist outfit whose intent is to legalize marijuana.
That may be the intent, but it was not passed
not what
But
as an intent.
that's
an
exactly
attempt
right.
to
We
legalize
do
marijuana.
not
Let the
have-
professor finish,
we do
please.
not
I'm not going to
have-
be yelled at again, Chuck.
We do not have legalized marijuana in Michigan. What we have is a broad universe of unlawful activity with an exception to being penalized if you meet this statute in specific terms. It's not legalization. In fact, it's broad.
Except,
It's
Chuck,
broad criminal
What does that have to
activity.
do? What does that have to do with the discussion? The whole point is that you raised a point, Charlie. You asked one question. You asked Rick, and then you asked Chuck, which is whether or not medical marijuana or marijuana gives anybody any sort of palliative effect. What's the difference whether or not we're not going to go back and reopen the
Well, you're
boxes?
trying to do that.
No, I'm not.
trying to
Has not
reopen
settled with the
legalization.
voters, though. It's all done
No,
right
it's
now.
not.
done.
So we have
It's over.
But no, it's
Professor,
not
are you
done.
saying that there's no medicinal value in medical marijuana?
Here's what I'm saying.
Answer that question.
Here's
please.
what I'm saying.
Just answer that one question.
Are you
Please.
are you the moderator? I'm sorry.
I want Charlie to make you answer the question.
Here's the idea.
What is the answer? though?
Well, here's the idea that they have named several things that are supposed to qualify, plus chronic pain, which is very ambiguous. And I don't know if anybody here would disagree that that's a very
But
ambiguous
that's for a
thing.
doctor to determine, though, isn't it?
And Charlie,
Well,
Yes.
it's not for a
Michael,
doctor.
let me
to
get Michael
determine.
come on in here.
27% of Michigan households are treating with chronic pain doctors right now, meaning they've been prescribed opiates. There's no one's talking about that. These are the same people that have now moved to a natural form to treat their serious condition. The real issues here are the terrible job that the state has done at even contemplating implementing this law. This is where the
But
focus should
here's
be.
the problem, though. A patient only has to go to a doctor one time. The doctor only has to say that you can have benefits from medical marijuana. There's no dosage. There's
Charlie,
no follow-up.
It's very easy.
There's no treatment.
Physicians have been
True or
doing
not
it
true?
Physicians have been doing it that way since the beginning of time.
There's
You
a
ha-
follow-up, though, if they prescribe opiates or
And you know what?
Vicodin or
And
anything.
you know what? The medical profession is the same profession that has been prescribing opiates, and they're the same ones that are doing the medical marijuana certifications. The remedies are to deal with the licensing board. The remedies are to track those doctors. We don't need these legislative bills that are going to make it more difficult for doctors to come out and work within the community.
Do you
These
think
bills,
there should be any restrictions on doctors that at least follow-up, of which there's nothing in the law right now?
They already exist within the law, Charlie. There's the professional licensing board, and if a physician is out of line, you send out an investigator to find out what's happening. That's the way it's always been done.
Charlie, here,
Yeah.
this is, again, this is the most salacious part of this conversation seems to be to go back and revisit 2008. If there are abuses in the Medical Marijuana Act or in the application of it, then those should be dealt with. I don't think that there should be, that the abuses should be ignored. I don't think that Mike thinks that they should be ignored. If there are doctors who are certifying patients without actually doing a thorough job, then you know what? Then they can be dealt with, but they can be dealt with the medical licensing board.
Well, Charlie-
and here's the challenge I have. The challenge I have is that every time we have one of these conversations, we get the same guys to come back and talk about the same issue that we started with.
I
Let's
agree.
talk about
Let's
now.
not go to
voters have-
2008. Let's go
Let's
right
not go
now.
to 2008.
Jump-
Let's go to
jump
addressing-
Addressing the issues that Neil brought forth is in the beginning infancy stage with up to 19 amendments and separate bills that are pending in Lansing. One of those bills would demand a real patient-client relationship where a physical examination occurs, and it wouldn't allow
That's on the
email,
doctor, though.
internet
That's
Let me
for
get
the
Bill
doctor,
Dwyer. Let me get Bill
Charlie.
Dwyer in here. Another one of the bills that's pending in the legislature, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you have to live in the state a year before you can obtain a caregiver card. I think that's one of the bills, right?
First
What's
of all,
the purpose
Charlie,
of that?
I was in law enforcement for over 48 years in charge of the narcotic division in Detroit back in the 70s and the 80s. And I'm going to tell you what, it doesn't matter if it's crack cocaine, heroin, or even marijuana. I think the law is bad, and I certainly oppose legalizing even medical marijuana because there's so many abuses. And what you're creating a criminal enterprise. You see more and more people, they're not in it, these caregivers are not in it to take care of, to have the compassion for people. They're in it for the money.
Fine,
The
they
same
can't
thing
make
with
any money.
same
You're
thing
not
with the
supposed to make
dispensaries.
money.
Charlie,
They only have bars and caregivers.
Charlie, look at all the dispensaries that we've closed down in Oakland
That's
County.
another generation.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not another
Charlie
generation.
brought in-
Not another
$10
generation.
million brought in by the state, and this is
no
still.
generalities
Let's
here.
just go
This
back
is
to the
specifics.
specifics.
All right,
Here's what I
Professor.
got.
Specifics here are the most important
I have a
thing, Charlie.
client.
let me
I have
go-
a
let me
client,
go.
for example,
All right,
who
Neil,
has
go ahead,
multiple
Neil.
sclerosis.
Okay, Neil, go ahead.
I have a client who has multiple sclerosis, and that is not a specific identified illness within the Medical Marijuana Act because it has so many different constellations and so many different. It's not specifically identified because it has so many different types of ways that it can manifest itself. And I want to tell you, this is a guy who's about our age who had no relief whatsoever from pain medications until he began to use medical marijuana. And I want to tell you,
Are we going back to 08? That's the
no,
argument
but I
for
want to
08,
tell you
Neil.
is that
You said you were the one
I'm
that didn't
gonna
want to
give
go
you-
back to 08.
I want to tell you. I want to tell you
beyond
why.
that now.
I want to tell you why I'm bringing him up today. Because here's a guy today who is growing his own marijuana under the act, and here's a guy today that has a card, and here's a guy that is terrified of a knock on the door when some neighbor of his happens to claim he smelled marijuana, and some ambitious police officer who doesn't believe in the medical marijuana
we're
act
talking about generalities again.
knocks on the door.
Hey,
wait a minute. You can't have it both ways.
I'm gonna.
You can't have
I
it
don't-
both ways.
I just want
You
to.
can't have it both ways.
I'm going to protect the patients.
Charlie,
We're not protecting anyone
I'm
but
just
healthy
going to
people.
protect
Come
that.
on, no generality.
He's by one
You're gonna
patient.
set down the rule.
I'm going to protect
Live by
that
it.
patient. I
Live
am.
by the rule.
Are
Let me
are
ask
you
you
going to
Dwyer.
leave my patient alone?
Hold on, Neil. Let me ask you, Dwyer.
Mr.
First-
Fisher, are
hold
you
on.
going to leave my patient alone?
Enough,
I
Neil.
promise to.
He's
Okay,
a
there you go.
professor. He can't do anything. But Bill Dwyer can. Assuming
That's
the
what
police
I'm
officer.
He's the guy I'm worried about.
You're not going to go out there and bust someone that's growing a plant who has a caregiver card and has done everything that the state says he's going to do. You're not going to bust that.
Not at
person,
all,
are you?
not at all.
And Chuck said to you,
Basically,
you're not
what law
either, right?
enforcement-
But they
But
are.
Charlie,
No,
Charlie,
no,
Charlie,
no.
it's still
Professor,
happening.
Professor.
May I have
Yes,
the floor for
Professor,
just
go
one
ahead.
second? Here's the problem, is that the people that ought to know whether there's a card out there, the law enforcement, ought to know so that they don't break down the door. They don't know.
The people don't know?
The law
There's a
enforcement
solution to that,
doesn't
too.
know.
There's a solution to that,
They've
too.
no
You
access.
say the cops
So here
don't
you go.
know
They
the
don't
law?
know.
The cops don't
They
know the
don't
law.
know.
They
They're
don't know.
not
You know why?
permitted
Because
to
there's,
know. That's
there's
the
been
problem.
no
You know that I
training,
have a
Charlie.
case right
Michael,
now?
Michael,
They're
Michael.
not training.
There's been
Michael,
very little,
Michael.
if any, training. There's been $10 million that's brought into the state. We're still hearing law enforcement of 40 years calling it and comparing it to crack cocaine. They have no knowledge
I
whatsoever.
said it's another drug. I'm not
Right, but
comparing
it's
it to
medical.
crack
It's used.
cocaine.
It's
Charlie,
used
you know that I have
medically,
a client
and
who
until
has-
you've seen the repair that it's done, the health that it's brought to people, and the better standard of living
But
that they've
it's
been
an
able to
illegal
have.
operation. so
Charlie,
that's
you're
It's
fine.
not illegal.
But it's not
It's
illegal.
illegal
Illegal
because the police
operation.
are
Don't
arresting.
we have another generality?
It's
about
illegal.
better standard
No,
of
no,
living?
no,
Where
no,
does this
no,
come
no,
from?
no.
They
Charlie,
arrested
I have a
18
client-
people
I
in
have
the
a client where
dispensary
the
in
police
Waterford.
actually- I have a case, a specific case, this is what I'm talking about, specifics. A specific client of mine where the police actually observed a medical marijuana certification showing that he was a medical marijuana patient. The police officer saw it. He ran the individual's name through Clemis, which is a local database of individual names. He found out the location where this guy was living, went out to the house. He smelled marijuana, and he got a search warrant, busted on the door, and now this guy's in court, and he's fighting
the
for
charge?
his life.
What's the
charge?
charge?
Manufacturing marijuana.
I have a
But he's
case-
got a caregiver card, right?
Yeah, and you know
so
what?
that one,
And you-
Neil, you should win.
And you know,
Charlie,
you know what's happening now?
It's happening like that
Is
all over the state. I have another client pulled over
Wait.
in a roadside
It's
to show him
happening
his
all the
card.
time.
They
Barb
take
Agro's
him to his
another
house
generality.
and raid the house.
this is
there
a
because
specific
he shows
case.
his
Chuck
card.
Santia.
Because he shows his
The
card.
feds,
It's happening
the
all over
feds
the
just
state.
came out. The federal
one
government.
time.
Hold on,
One
Neil.
time is
Hold on,
okay.
Neil.
Talking about one time.
The federal government
Is it
just
one
came
time
out with a
okay?
new
Are there
order.
mistakes in every
Professor.
profession?
It shouldn't be with that.
Professor, let me get to Neil, then we get to you. Okay, here's the federal government just came out with a new order yesterday, barring users, medical marijuana users, from possessing firearms. You agree with that?
Well, heroin dealers and cocaine dealers and anyone on drugs shouldn't
Is
be
this
running around with
overkill?
guns.
Is this overkill? Is the
Anyone
law
high on drugs
overkill?
shouldn't have a gun in their hand.
Chuck, then you need to give
Professor,
up your,
what about
give up
this
your
law?
Xanax prescription.
Professor, what
or
about this
your-
law? Oh, is
or
this
your
overkill?
Vicodin prescription. Because those are, then
All
you
right,
shouldn't
Professor,
have a gun
Professor.
either under that
In
reason.
other words, are they no possession whatsoever?
Anybody
if
with
you
a medical
have-
marijuana card cannot possess a firearm.
That's a little difficult.
Charlie goes a little
Difficult.
bit beyond, goes way beyond that.
That's what the
though.
federal, that's
5
what
years
it
in
is.
prison.
The alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
Let me get Rick.
Wait,
I
the
have
professor
Rick.
said it's difficult.
Yep. The ATF letter
I agree with him.
the ATF letter actually encourages persons that sell guns or sell ammunition to discriminate against people that are medical marijuana users. If you even suspect that a person has a medical marijuana card, you are not allowed to sell them ammunition. You are not allowed to sell them guns. You are now putting a decision in the hands of an untrained individual as to whether or not a person is impaired or is participating in a medical marijuana program and telling them that they're not allowed to transfer firearms to you. The ATF letter steps on very, very dangerous thin ice.
And Charlie, do you know that the federal government currently, that unbeknownst to a lot of people, the federal government currently, and has since 1979, supplied, I think it was originally 14
There's 4 left.
people with, there are 4 left, 4 people who are still surviving today, with approximately, I want to say 8 ounces of, is it 8 ounces?
300
300
marijuana
marijuana cigarettes
Nice big
a month.
The federal government
The
does?
federal government does
So when
that.
they
Is this an
say-
experiment, or is this
No,
some?
it is a licensed program that they have. Herb Roosevelt is one of the people. He testified before the committee.
So what are you saying then? The federal government likes medical
They
marijuana?
know
or
that it has
embraces this?
medicinal value, yet they are
But we're going back to
criminalizing
08
it.
though. That's
No,
we're
the-
done.
No,
the-
you're asking about the guns.
the
The
point I'm making
reasoning
is-
in the
Gotcha.
gun is that these are drug users that are drug addicts, while at the same time they are sending cans of cannabis cigarettes to at least 4 or 5 patients across the country
And we
right
have
now.
veterans who are.
Bill
we
Dwyer.
have
Let me say
veterans.
this.
What about
Dwyer.
National
Narcotic
Guardsmen?
enforcement team in Oakland County has executed over 100 search warrants on private homes, and only 5% of those people were halfway in compliance, only less than 5%.
And Jessica
Now,
Cooper was
that's not
complaining
true.
that they were out of
That's
money
not
to
true.
go
That's
prosecute
not true.
real
Bill,
serious
that's
crimes.
not true.
They're
I have the
spending
cases.
all their money
That's
Let's
not
talk
true.
about the
I-
Bill,
medical
Dwyer,
marijuana
Bill, that's not
prosecution.
true. Hold on,
Let-
Bill,
let
that's
Bill
not
make
true.
his
How
point.
about the
Bill, make his
Waterford
point.
dispensary? 18 arrested, all pled
They
guilty.
tried
My
to
client
spend
hasn't
$1
pled
million
guilty.
Waterford.
My
That's-
client
that's
has not pled
absolutely
guilty.
false.
Bill, I represent somebody in that
That's
case. My client has not
absolutely
pled
false.
guilty.
Everybody's cafe.
Hold on.
My
on.
client has
Where's
not
the
pled
truth
guilty.
on this
18
panel?
Bill,
arrested,
hold on.
most
Bill,
pled guilty.
Bill,
Most
read your,
pled
read, what's your statement there? What's your point?
I'm just saying that these places that are being raided, we're finding that, for example, in Ferndale, 16 arrested, some pled out, some
No
are
one is.
pending.
Hold on, hold on, hold on.
Big
Ferndale,
Daddy.
hold on,
Finish.
stop it.
Let
No, no,
him
no, no, no.
finish.
That's
Let him
Ferndale.
finish.
That's my case.
Let him finish.
Nobody has pled out in Ferndale. No one. In fact, Judge Longo dismissed one of the defendants at a preliminary examination. The rest of us are scheduled for trial. We were supposed to start trial tomorrow. It got adjourned to January. That case is going to trial. No one has
of those
pled.
search
So I'm
warrants being
talking
thrown
about it.
around.
Nobody
Right.
has
True.
pled.
Some
How
have.
much money they
Some
spent
have.
on it anyways?
Well, how
Just
much is
the
it? How
prosecutor
much-
You don't
was
know about Charles
complaining
Clements
about
or your own
How
case?
much
You
are
know-
these
you know some more?
I know
prosecutions
my own
costing?
case.
Professor, do you know how much these prosecutions are costing?
I don't know how much they're costing, but I have a question I'd like you to ask.
Please.
All of us, and that is whether everybody is of a like mind that the act is ambiguous in some important ways that needs to be, that there are clarification is needed.
No question about it.
That's the
I would
nature
say
of
this, I would say
that's the
this.
nature of
18 years
Yeah.
of practicing
question
law,
about it.
Charlie. Every time I hear a prosecutor say that the law is confusing, it means the law doesn't favor him. That's the problem.
Well, why are so
This
many
law
people
was written
being
broadly.
arrested? It
The
hurts
idea was to have
everybody.
people stop arresting patients and allow them to get off the battlefield
So
on
what
the
do we
losing
do,
war on
Professor?
drugs.
We all agree that the law is confusing
Yeah.
for a lot of reasons, from the doctors to the amounts to where you get this,
Right.
etc. What do we do?
I think that the legislature has an uphill battle because it takes a 3/4 vote to modify the act. I don't think that's going to work. But I think groups like this should get together and negotiate some changes and present them to the legislature.
change would you make?
I think we could clarify, do we have patient-to-patient deliveries permissible? Should law enforcement have any information available to them so they don't kick doors down in advance?
Correct.
We need those kinds of things. What is medical use? I mean, it's a definition that really has no definition. And all of those kinds of things, we could come to an agreement very quickly.
Chuck Simpson, do you agree with the professor's
That's-
talking about?
Every point he made is contained in one of those 16 bills that I mentioned that are pending right now, and they do need to be addressed. I don't think the law is ambiguous. I think it was intentionally void of details
Do they need a
to allow 100,000.
three-fourths vote to pass those laws?
Oh, yeah, well, some yes and some no. Out of those.
Some
Some are
what's
direct amendments to the initiative, some are not. And
Charlie,
so you got a bundle of both. But I think the bill was drafted in a way to open the door for attorneys like this to drive a Mack truck
this.
through it
There you go.
and
This is
say
the language
you can
from
have
the-
dispensaries and
Hey,
$100,000 people selling dope.
Chuck and I worked in the prosecutor's office together. We work side by side. He has the same bar alongside him. It just has a different name on it.
Hold on, okay.
This is what 63% of the voters in Michigan voted for, to permit registered and unregistered patients and primary caregivers, that means people with cards and people without cards, to assert medical reasons for using marijuana as a defense to any prosecution involving marijuana. There is no confusion about that. That is the 4th paragraph in the proposal. That's what 63% of the people
Charlie,
voted
ask
for. And you
Mike
know
if
what?
that last part's happening. Are defendants in marijuana cases,
Are being denied the right
are they allowed to assert the defense? How many people are being able to assert a defense in even arguable or clear cases? The
Professor,
answer
any
is
of them?
Yeah,
You've
well,
studied the law.
Any?
Yes, of course, if they comply strictly with the statute.
That's ridiculous.
And they're not complying.
They're not compliant.
Any
Some of the
defense.
cases, though,
required
some,
according
Neil,
to
I think it was your
Illinois
case.
tax.
Your client was growing medical marijuana in an outhouse with no top on it,
It
right?
wasn't my case.
Well, good, but it was a case, though.
I usually don't go to places like I don't go to
That's a bad
outhouses
case,
and
though.
roadhouses.
But yet you don't have a problem with that, do you? If that person was arrested for growing his medical marijuana in an outhouse in full view of the world, right?
If it's not locked and enclosed, then I have a problem with it.
You do not have a problem.
If it is not locked or capable of being locked and enclosed, then I have a problem with it. Okay. Yeah. I
I
personally,
have a problem with this law being used as a shield by ongoing drug operations that are selling drugs to everyone in the
You
state who
can't
now
tell.
don't have medical
That's exactly
now,
right.
certification.
Are you telling me
That's
that
the problem.
seriously that you cannot tell
There's a random
the
study.
the
You don't even have your
marijuana
facts right
user
on
from the
existing cases, let
marijuana
alone
trafficker? You can't tell that?
Charlie,
This
Where's that
law
come
is,
from?
the way that the law is interpreted by some of my peers here would allow all the drug dealers to have the shield under
It's
the law.
12
The law
plants.
professor,
Right.
the law
That's not true.
professor is saying they
shut down
shouldn't
the
have that.
dispensaries in California, and crime went up. There was a RAND study that just came out. The dispensaries bring down crime. This is a red herring.
That just came out
Oh, no
2
way.
days ago.
There's no way.
Let me tell you what
Hold on, Bill Dwyer.
the four U.S. attorneys in California just came out. They said the existence of dispensaries have increased drug dealing to vulnerable population, underage youth, and people with mental health and addiction issues in our neighborhoods, and sends the wrong message
Rick, do you
to the
agree with
youth
that?
about drug use.
All right, everyone, consider the source of the information here. Our statistics is provided by the RAND Corporation, which is a well-known, internationally recognized, neutral think tank, which produces these type of studies. Yours were produced by 4 district attorneys, right? From the United States
that true?
Attorney's
Where was-
Office.
where was this
You just
from?
read that,
Help.
sir.
Where
You
was
just
this
read
from?
I'm saying
that,
that's
sir.
part of what
Now,
there's
let's
a number
address
of
another-
agencies that support
Let's address another
the
issue.
studies
Well,
in
and we don't know
California.
commissions
Mike,
are
Michael,
excellent.
I want to ask Jerry Fisher if he
Regardless
agrees
of
with
the-
something, Professor Fisher, if he
Go
agrees
ahead.
with something that came out
I'm not
that I
gonna-
saw
I'm
today.
not going to hurt any of your clients.
Okay, no, good. My clients are pretty
Not
tough.
going
They
in
can
an
handle it.
outhouse, are you?
So, Justice Scalia, who I know you're familiar with, I don't know anything about your politics or your interpretation philosophy of the Constitution. Came out. He testified in front of the Senate. I think it was yesterday, and he actually criticized the federal narcotics laws, and he criticized them because he felt as though the federal government spending its time prosecuting drug cases has, in some respects, reduced the quality of the federal bench, he said, and it also has taken valuable time away from the court's focusing efforts on other cases. And so here's my question. The whole purpose of the Medical Marijuana
What's the
Act,
question there? Okay.
I want to know if you agree with that, number one, with that federal law enforcement has no business actually interfering in local medical marijuana cases. For example, if someone...
Okay, so let's get.
That's what I want to know.
Let's get the professor. Federal
Well,
law.
I mean, if federal law is the law of the land.
Do you believe they should?
Then obviously the prosecutors and the judges have to deal with it.
And
It's a
my
Schedule I
understanding was
substance.
Okay.
that Jessica Cooper, for example, just made a speech to the Oakland County Board of Commissioners, basically saying that it is medical marijuana, like any marijuana, is illegal under federal law.
That's correct.
Therefore,
That's correct.
you don't have to enforce the medical marijuana
Right, that's what I
provisions
wanted to
that
know.
was
Here
just
you go.
passed.
So here's my
True
next
or not
question.
true?
The federal
My
government
next question
can't
is-
make the states enforce their law. That's what the 10th Amendment prevents against. And if the states want to do it and they want to prosecute, then it's going to take place in state court.
But federal law
the
trumps
federal
state
law.
law.
Well,
We
If
know
the
that.
federal
Charlie-
government wants to come in and prosecute
And they
take you
are.
to federal
And
court,
they are.
well then
My
let
second
them
question
do
was
that,
this.
but don't use the state resources to do it because as we know,
Charlie,
there's
my
like-
second question
Charlie,
was-
the
my second-
federal
Let me
law,
get Chuck. Let me get Chuck.
the federal law is the one that needs to address this.
I agree.
Because the
Congress-
federal law trumps everything.
Yeah, but-
Arguing
Congress-
about the
this is-
state laws is a game where everyone's chasing themselves
no,
in
this is-
circles.
this is why I
The
wanted-
federal law trumps everything. It's illegal.
It's
and that's
also
what ultimately is going to be determined in the state.
the reason why I wanted to ask Professor Fisher that is because Mr. Dwyer brought out federal law enforcement. Chuck has brought out federal law enforcement, and none of us here are federal law enforcement officers. We aren't part of the executive branch, and we aren't part of federal Congress. And so until the U.S. Attorney or President Obama comes in and
Congress.
tells us that or Congress comes in and says that we can't actually enforce the Medical Marijuana Act, then can we finally please have those of us that act and prosecute and defend on the state level just focus on the state offenses and and on the state, let's stop talking about federal law in Royal Oak. Stop talking about federal law in Warren or Farmington. Stop talking about federal.
I
let's
actually
just deal with
thought
the state
President
law.
Obama came out with an order from the Justice Department telling the Justice Department not to prosecute marijuana patients in states that have passed a medical marijuana law.
That's still
Professor?
the case.
That was October 2010, June 2011, fast forward, and now that is reversed.
No.
Oh, yes, it is.
It's not
No,
reversed.
no,
What
I
they
can-
did is they changed their policy and said
Yes.
they were going to, and they delivered letters to a number of states
Right.
that took that information from the
that-
federal government, and it developed comprehensive legislation that they were about to enact to allow for grows and dispensaries to be licensed from the state. And the U.S. Attorney's letter said, if you, governor, sign those bills, we're going to arrest your state employees.
The Hague Memorandum still says. The Hague Memorandum still says that patients.
Alexander Haig?
No, it's named after U.S. Attorney Haig, H-A-A-G,
Gotcha.
in California. The Hague Memorandum still says that they're not going to actually go after.
Professor.
I think that
patients.
Hague memorandum is no longer valid, and I think the June 2011 trumped it.
Let me ask Rick.
That is the Hague
In
Memorandum.
California, they've had medical marijuana legal for a number of years. The state of California taxes medical marijuana, and it's actually creating a lot of jobs and money for the state. Isn't this something maybe we should do here in Michigan? Is to get rid of these people having these cards and turn it over to the state for regulation? Would you be in favor of that?
No, I wouldn't be in favor of that because the purpose of having the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act is not to generate revenue for the state, but to empower individual patients to take advantage of a medicine that they can't get at a pharmacy, to be able to take advantage of an opportunity to receive relief that doesn't come at a
What
huge
about the
cost.
taxing ability? The state can make some money on this.
Now, Andy Dillon, the treasurer of the state of Michigan, came out with a letter which stated that the state of Michigan is not able to recoup any monies from this program, not excise tax, not state tax, sales tax, not user tax. There are no ways for them to do that. So in order for that to be a reality, it would require a change in the Medical Marijuana Act itself.
Bill Dwyer.
I just want to clarify as far as law enforcement. I'm the only person here from law enforcement other than Chuck, who was the prosecutor. But
I was too.
yeah,
That doesn't count.
I was a prosecutor in Oakland County.
we're going to. Okay, I'm sorry.
We used to work
Law enforcement.
But after his
Sorry
views,
about
you can
that.
see why he's not a prosecutor anymore.
Now, law enforcement is in a catch-22
I
with
sinned
this law.
once, that's how I defend my
If I can speak, if I can
Go
speak.
ahead, go ahead.
please.
Bill Dwyer.
Now, law enforcement is a catch-22 with this law. You know, it's damned if we do, damned if we don't. You know, we get information, we're obligated to follow up on that information as far as an investigation. And that's what's been happening. In the majority of these cases, 90-some% of these cases are very, very valid, excellent investigations conducted by law enforcement in Oakland County or anywhere else in this state.
In the traditional criminal investigations, without any new view as to medical marijuana, I've heard stories when they do execute the warrants, they get in, someone gets up off the couch to show a card, and they're thrown to the ground, and a gun's put to the back of their head because that's the way they're used to doing it.
Generalities.
But listen to me, let me say this.
Come on.
The idea of the state running this program should be concerning. They are 6 months behind with getting the cards out. They have not even made any attempts to get new conditions onto the registry for other patients of other conditions to be able to apply for. So the idea of the state getting involved with it is a joke. They've been a complete disaster for this program.
That's required until the feds change the law. Because if the state gets involved and starts affirmatively acting like that, they're going to be violating federal law.
Think there's any chance the federal government will get involved in medical marijuana?
Well, sure.
I don't think.
Charlie,
I don't
the
think that
trouble,
individuals
Charlie, the
should be-
trouble here is complaining about enforcement of a medical marijuana law. My true belief is that the state of Michigan doesn't have a medical marijuana law. We have something that's labeled that. It's completely different from what normal people would think is medically related. It doesn't have the traditional distribution mechanisms of controlled substances at a
Drugstores,
drugstore.
pharmacies, that type of thing.
And all the complaints and the arguments stem from what everything else this law tries to encompass, and everything else attorneys try to interpret and build into this that doesn't exist.
But you
City
guys,
commissioners as well. Let's not forget city commissioners on that issue as well.
No, some people tried to actually create a system that was There's some folks who tried to create a system that resembled pharmacies. I'm not saying that was right or wrong, but there are people that tried to create a system that resembled pharmacies, and the police went and the police departments went, at least one in particular, the Oakland County Sheriff's Department, they actually authorized their police officers to create fake medical marijuana cards, and then the people went in, the officers with fake medical
that was
marijuana
part of
cards.
the law doesn't
allow them to do
Why?
illegal
Why
to
would
do
you
that.
do
that
that?
allows
Why would you
investigation.
pretend to be somebody who's
That's part of
ill?
an
Why would
investigation.
into what?
We
Into
do
a
it in
medical
all
marijuana
sorts of
pharmacy?
Into trickery and lies
Hey,
and deceit.
if
That's the way
there's
that
no
police officers
illegal
do
activity
business.
going on, then there's
But
nothing
Bill,
to hide.
Chuck just said that. Chuck just said that it was. We don't have a system that's like pharmacies, and all I'm saying is some people tried to make them like
We
pharmacies.
need a legal system that's like pharmacies, not the law we have here now.
Chuck, will
we
you
have
offer-
a
will you-
law.
Then you
Will
need
you
to draft that and
draft one,
propose
Chuck?
it to the
Will you
Congress.
draft one?
Draft it and
And
propose
until
it.
that
Will you draft
time,
one?
until that time, this law needs to be amended or repealed because it's causing way too much grief for everyone.
You guys do make it easy. Leave it alone.
63% of the people said let's leave
All
it
right,
the way it
we're
is.
about a halfway mark right here. We are going to we want to know what you're thinking. 248-589-7778. This is the Oakland Press and the Community Media Network town hall meeting on medical marijuana. I want to now go to Steve Fry. Steve Fry, who has been anxiously compiling questions and emails from our viewers here. Steve Fry, what do you have for a question for the panel? Steve?
Okay, first a couple comments, and then the final one will be the question. Road Rage asked, with so many communities going broke, why spend or waste millions of dollars going after the sick? Could this money be spent keeping the libraries open? Referring to one of our earlier town halls about the Troy Library. Someone asked, will the state of Michigan keep preying on the sick and the weak?
All right, let's answer that question. Let's answer that question. Who wants to answer the question?
Well, there's no question about it as far as this law is creating a problem for law enforcement as far as our resources.
Would it be easier if this
But-
law was legalized?
You
Bill
can't
Dwyer?
overlook the
Would it
law.
be
The law is the law, be it enforcing marijuana, cocaine, heroin. We have a responsibility. And if we get information of illegal activity, then it's our responsibility or it's law enforcement's responsibility to investigate.
I know this is not the topic. I don't want to go totally off the topic, but
Let's
if,
answer the writer's
if
question.
marijuana was legalized, wouldn't it be easier for law enforcement?
Sure it would be.
Are you in favor of legalization?
But is that the right
No,
thing to do?
you know, if you look right now, 80% of the people that are in jail or prison are there because of drug addiction, be it marijuana, heroin, or cocaine. So, you know, legalizing marijuana is not the solution. It's not the solution.
Most
in
of
my
my clients
opinion.
are in jail because they've actually committed real crimes, like like
Robbery,
growing in the outhouse.
homicide.
No. Most of my, no. I got clients who are in jail for real stuff, like fraud and theft and
But
deceit.
it'd be easier for law enforcement if we took the fraud laws off the books,
Sure.
too.
No,
If
because
the criteria
there's a
is
victim
what's-
that's associated
if
with that.
The
How about
criteria
this?
is
But
what's
that's not the
easy.
solution,
If
legalizing.
fraud is
How about
easy,
cancer
I don't-
away,
that
then
was
maybe
not
we
the
should.
solution.
If fraud
Bill's the one who
cured
said that it
cancer,
would
maybe
be
we
easier for
should.
law enforcement.
Well, sure, but that's not.
Yes.
Sure, it would be, but that's not the
I'm all
solution.
ears.
I'm not advocating legalizing it.
I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm just saying to answer the writer's question.
yes.
The person that wrote Mr. Fry or wrote Steve asked the question: wouldn't it save local communities valuable and scarce resources?
The answer is yes.
And the answer, of course, is yes.
No.
And it would cut
It's
down-
absolutely
Absolutely
no.
not.
It'd be no.
Because what is one of the most important resources we have?
Please don't say children.
Children.
Because I'm
Absolutely.
I
children.
love my kids.
Absolutely
My kids
children.
are. Don't even
And
go
what
there.
is
That's
marijuana?
offensive. That's offensive.
What is
the
it going to
children.
do to them emotionally,
I just did the-
educationally, occupationally?
Jerry,
What is it going to do
I
to
just
them?
did the-
We don't know.
Chuck,
Are you saying
I-
medical marijuana
I
is
just did
dangerous
the
for
sound
children?
bit.
Absolutely.
I just did
Absolutely.
the-
Because how can they make a choice
Hold on.
of whether to use it or not? They have no idea.
Wait a minute.
Children.
I just did the Ashambi
They have
yesterday.
no
and said
idea.
it. I
Children
did
are
the-
the ones who
I
make
just
the
spent
worst
Yom Kippur
decisions
in
about
synagogue on
drugs.
Saturday.
The
I
first
can't
decisions
listen to
children
that.
make that are bad are about drugs. They make more bad decisions about drugs than anyone else. And with the quantity of these drugs increasing in a
that's a function of-
logarithmic progression,
I'm
they're
sorry.
just going to
That's a
have more.
function of
Michael,
parenting.
do you agree with that?
That's absolutely
way.
ridiculous.
That absolutely not.
Ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
There is no way.
The Obama
that-
administration
First of all,
has a report online that
hold
says
on.
the
In
exact
response
same
to the
thing.
question, there is millions of dollars spent in prosecuting marijuana arrests in Michigan alone. If they took those dollars and put it on for real crimes, you know, marijuana patients are low-hanging fruit. It's easy. There's low risk. You can smell it. You get into a car. You smell it in a house. This is easy. It's not challenging. This is serious investigating. What do they find when they get in there? Danger? No. They go in with guns. And what are they trying to stop? What kids are getting hurt? That's what I want to know. The reality is that the red herring that's being offered here of some kind of danger of medical marijuana is a slap in the face of the voters. You have 63% of the people that want
Well,
this.
wait a minute,
Where
wait
are
a
the
minute.
people that are against
Read
it?
the ballot
Where are
again.
the people
All right,
that are
Professor,
against it?
Read the
Professor,
ballot
go ahead.
proposal again, and you show
just
me.
read it.
You show me the.
I know that it's not
you show
happening.
me
I
the
know that
word
people aren't
children
getting
in
right
there.
to a jury
You
trial.
show me
I know
the word
that.
minor or children in that ballot proposal. It ain't there.
What
Right.
point does that
What does
have?
that have to do with it?
What point does
How
that
about
make?
parents? How about
But
parents?
children can't have it if they don't have a doctor's prescription for it, though. Hold on. Neil, Neil.
If you have a case, I will volunteer my services right now. If Chuck Semchina, Bill Dwyer, or Jerry Fisher knows of one kid that has actually gotten medical marijuana who shouldn't have, I will personally volunteer my office, my time. I will devote all my resources.
Well, it's gonna be a plea,
I will
'cause there's
go
no- there's no
I'll go-
issue there.
I will go after that parent, and we will actually sue the parent, and I'll have Chuck Semchina, Jerry Fisher, and Bill Dwyer
witness.
as
All right.
co-plaintiffs. Let's do it if
There
we
aren't
know of it.
enough. There aren't
Appreciate
enough.
you saying that.
You don't know of one, Jerry
There aren't
Fisher.
enough. Oh, I do.
You're on it.
There
But
aren't
if-
enough.
if-
There
all right,
are,
let's
but there
go.
aren't
All right.
enough.
All right,
real
let me get.
archives
All right,
to
Steve
take
Fry.
care of it.
Do it.
All right, let me get Steve Fry. Steve Fry has another question from a viewer. By the way,
this is
it's
from the
theoaklandpress.com or 248-589-7778. Steve Fry, another question, please.
I have a lot of personal friends. I'm a veteran, and I have a lot of personal friends who are veterans. And I know a lot of guys who actually use marijuana so they can safely sleep next to their spouses. A lot of infantry soldiers have a lot of angry and violent nightmares. And I know them personally, and I've seen it help them. They calm down. They're not as jittery. They're not checking people's shoes when they walk into a room. And I'm just wondering who you're protecting by keeping them from getting marijuana. Like, if you can tell me that you're protecting somebody.
Wearing an Ohio State shirt.
Yeah, I did see the Ohio State, so I don't know what happened there. Chuck Semchina.
Everyone has a friend who's a good drug user or a client who's a good drug dealer. I'm just saying here that I think
point your finger
about
at me.
95%
If mine are caught,
of
they're
these
bad drug
people
dealers.
who
They
are
got
selling are doing it for different reasons than what you just described.
those people should
And
be
this law
arrested, though.
is
Those
giving
people
them a
should be
shield.
Answer the guys.
Those people should be arrested.
You wouldn't approve of that, though, Chuck, because that's someone with post-traumatic stress syndrome, which isn't technically on the registry, and you'd say that that person got their card fraudulently.
I never said
Rick.
that person should not, theoretically, should never have
You just called
a
him a drug
medicine.
addict.
Yeah.
That's
said
what
it-
I
you
said.
you said you-
The person he
He's
described.
he's a post-traumatic
The person
stress
he
syndrome that's not on
described
it. And the
is I
state
think,
isn't
is
doing
in a
anything about it.
minority
Hold on.
compared to the
Mike.
large number
Rick,
of users.
We
All right,
have
let's get
transcripts.
Rick.
Didn't he just say, Rick, didn't Chuck Semchina just say, quote, everyone has a friend who is a good
A known drug
addict."
dealer. Yes, a nice
good
drug
addict that
dealer.
pointed to me and
Drug
said, "Oh,
user.
I don't know
drug
anybody.
dealer."
I don't have any friends, I guess. Rick, what do you want to say?
Client with a good drug
The most
dealer.
important thing to realize is that in any community, in any group of people, whether it's law enforcement or whether it's medical marijuana patients, there will be a few bad actors. Chuck, we should not all judge law enforcement based on the actions of the Romulus police chief and his persons. Not all law enforcement persons should be judged by that standard, and not all medical marijuana patients should be held up to the accountability of the worst of our community. I think it's an invalid statement to make, and I absolutely, excuse me, excuse me, Chuck, excuse me, I've listened to you for a long time. Let me just finish what I'm saying. And I absolutely support Neil with his statement that if you know the name of a case where a child has received medical marijuana from a licensed medical marijuana distribution center, say it right now or shut up.
Go get the
Say it
parents.
right now.
Go get the parents.
Or stay off that issue.
Well, we still have 20 more minutes. Don't shut up. Don't shut up now. We still have more to go, though. All right, we don't know. Anybody? Okay, Steve Fry.
To the sheriff's department.
Steve Fry, you have.
I'll help out.
All right, Steve Fry, you have another question.
From
Steve.
the audience.
It's kind of a comment and partly a question. When you say that children are in danger from medical marijuana, I want to know how many of you have seen in a dispensary. I want to know how many of you have seen them walking down the street like you so described, like they're got a trick-or-treat bag with drugs carrying them down the street. It's just mischaracterization. It's offensive on every level. I'm an HIV patient, and I'm a caregiver, and I'm a patient. And I will not have you characterize me as a criminal and threaten me at my door. 18 guys from the Oakland County Sheriff's Department showed up at my door after they already knew who I was. They knew what I'm doing. I went and knocked on their door and told them. For them to come there and mischaracterize try and say that my criminal past was somehow making me not a caregiver and they want to arrest me. This is nothing but a farce because it's about control of money. That's what this is about. You guys want control of money because if we're low-hanging fruit, it's easy to get the police to profit themselves. It's policing for profit. When they can go out there and they don't have to, listen, you guys don't have to have a warrant.
I don't know how much
I want to finish,
anything
please.
for
Let me
profit.
finish.
Let's let Bill Dwyer.
If we're
Let's let
talking
Bill
about
Dwyer answer. Bill.
Underage youth.
Bill.
The sheriff's department can give you many examples of people, young people that are using the medical marijuana or getting them from the dispensaries. And
If
we'll
they're
provide that
underage,
information
No one's in
to you.
favor of this.
If you
No
have-
one's in favor of this on
But
this
it's
panel.
happening. But it's happening. That's all I'm
Well,
saying.
that's
It's
law
happening.
enforcement or the
Mike,
parent.
hang on,
And
you
it
know
would
what?
happen
Bill,
much
okay.
more readily on the
Listen,
street.
of all things that come, we don't know each other very well. And I may be loud and I may be boisterous, but one thing that no one's ever accused me of is not being a devoted father. I care about my 3 kids, and I'm sure you folks care about your kids equally. I don't have a gun, I don't have any weapons, but you know what? I would do whatever I had to protect my kids. And I would do that for my kids' friends as well. And so if there's a child somewhere who's a child, 13, 15, 12, 10, 7, and you guys know of it, instead of just talking about it generally, I've invited you now 4 times. Write the name down,
But-
tell me
but-
where to
but
go.
Everybody agrees
but
if a
I-
child
let's-
gets
let's
medical
stop talking
marijuana,
about it.
that's
I think
not
it
right.
would
Let's
all-
not
That's
take
not the
children
issue.
and put them out in
That's
front
not
of.
the issue.
We
That's
would
not the
agree
issue.
I
that
know.
it is happening.
Bill, but those
I don't
Would
know
you
that.
not?
If it's happening,
No,
tell
no,
me.
no,
We
no,
dispute the
absolutely.
fact. You
Professor,
say it's
I
not
haven't seen
happening.
it happen.
Until you
This
can
subject-
provide
I'm not saying
evidence,
it's
we
not
don't
This
agree.
subject-
I don't
Professor,
know it.
This subject arose under the question of whether marijuana should be legalized. That's where it arose, not under interpretation of the act. And that's where I was suggesting that we need to take a little better look at the impact on children.
I'm not commenting on
So we're not,
it.
okay,
I'm not
so we're not
commenting
doing
on
on legalization.
I'm just talking
Nobody
about
is
the
talking about
medical marijuana.
legalization
Right.
at the
Charlie,
present
the
time.
thing-
Chuck.
The Obama administration, Department of Drug Policy, has a website. They've got studies themselves. This is the president's department. They analyze the drug use of children. The marijuana usage is up, and they specifically point out problems with dispensaries and in states that have medical marijuana laws. They correlate the drug use of marijuana with lower grades and flunking out in school. It is a problem.
Well-
It's documented. It's out there.
If
It's
it's
everywhere.
abused, that's
No, we're
true.
not- but we're not-
But we're not talking, we're talking about medical
right,
marijuana,
different.
though.
This is the Christmas
Chuck, are
tree
you sa-
argument.
Are you saying that if medical marijuana is allowed to exist, that kids are going to get medical
I'm
marijuana?
Jewish.
Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're
This
saying?
is the Christmas tree argument.
What Christmas tree? I'm Jewish.
menorah argument.
I got a menorah argument. A Hanukkah bush.
Legislature's got to do something
A
with the
Hanukkah
law.
bush argument.
This
Kwanzaa
is the
argument.
Christmas tree, and Charlie knows this argument. Let me finish. please.
Dreidel argument. If I spit
It's
on Dreidel,
because,
I'll get
it's
marijuana.
because the quantity that could be grown under this act is so vastly great than what one patient can use. There's going to be excess.
That's right.
That's what the Court of Appeals case was all about,
Yep.
the excess
Let me
getting
say this.
sold at a dispensary.
Is there excess, Michael?
This may be for limited people, but the reality is that the way the Court of Appeals has been ruling doesn't even recognize the real needs of the people that need it most. Because now we have situations where if you really are taking care of someone who's dying, they're throwing up in a bucket and you go and get certified and you've never grown cannabis before in your life, you have no idea, and you watch every YouTube video in one night, where are you going to go to start? You can't, because there's no patient-to-patient transfer. You got to go into some place and do a transfer just to acquire the seeds or plants to grow. And then, if you're lucky, after 3 or 4 months, maybe you'll have a plant that you can give to a sick one. And the law, the way it's being ruled in the Court of Appeals, is not allowing the people that really need it to acquire cannabis.
Isn't that
Nice
another
one.
shortcoming of the statute?
It is.
No, it's not.
Why,
It's not.
why don't you say that to President Obama's administration?
Because we're talking
that
about
could
state
change
law.
the law.
Let's talk about state law.
Because there will
I'm
never
talking
be
to
an
you.
effective state
I'm
law
talking to you to
until the
ask
federal
you,
law is
I'm
changed.
asking you to look at
Yeah,
things a
hey,
little
Mike,
bit
I have a
different.
different-
From
Mike,
the most
Mike,
sick person
I have a
who
different
is
question.
dying and needs
Chuck,
cannabis now.
Chuck is
and they
in-
have
I
nowhere
don't
to
want
go.
to change
Hold on, but Chuck,
anything other than
do
the
you-
federal
do
law
you-
if that helps.
Can you, Chuck, you're currently a public official. Mike and I are not. Can you arrange for Mike and I to have that sit down with President Obama? Because if you can, I'm sure Mike would take you up on that opportunity.
This is what. Well, you certainly arranged to show up here tonight. You could show up on his
Does the
doorstep.
president take your
We
call?
will if you can arrange it. We'll be there.
248-589-7778, theoaklandpress.com, if you'd like to get in on this conversation. Steve Fry is standing by. He's got yet more questions and comments on this town hall meeting regarding medical marijuana. Steve.
Yes, first I'll read a comment and then a question. Jack writes, I personally feel that marijuana has been useful for chemo patients dealing with nausea. He goes on to say a little bit more about how it could help people. But his biggest concern is with the marijuana laws that it got too out of control. I know for a fact that people were buying it from dispensaries and reselling to the public. I voted for this law, but never dreamed it would become a market for every drug dealer in town. And
All
we
right,
have a-
let's get Rick to answer that question. Is it out of hand? Because the dispensary, there, and by the way, as I understand the act, the word dispensary isn't even in the act. It's not even there.
Absolutely true. The word dispensary is not in the act.
So you don't have a problem then if there's a dispensary that crops up that the police would arrest the people running that dispensary. It violates the law. Yes.
Depends on which law you're talking about. In
Well,
the
this
city
law.
of Ferndale itself, they've empowered dispensing locations and cultivation locations within the city, codified it in ordinance law. In that particular scenario, ordinance law protects it, state law protects it. Why should law enforcement have any interest in that facility? at all?
Hasn't the Court of Appeals
Well,
already ruled on that?
well,
Chuck?
Professor, can Ferndale undo what the state did?
Ferndale
There's a pecking
is
order here.
basically an instrument of the state. Ferndale takes its authority from the state. If the state doesn't authorize it, they can't do it.
I might get the professor to agree with me on this as a solution, because I think this is notated in his white paper, but a bill that actually addresses some of these issues of zoning, where money is going to be spent, how it's going to be taxed, is really what we're talking about. These are much of the problems that we're talking about, these dispensaries and whatnot. The business aspect can be solved by a different type of statutory regulatory scheme, a dispensary bill. You wouldn't disagree with that, would you? And then you can leave the Medical Marijuana Act alone to its to what it was intended for, to allow patients to grow and caregivers to interact with them, and to provide
Professor?
With
cannabis.
all due respect, I cannot possibly agree with that we would allow dispensaries and leave the act the way it is. We have to change the act.
I disagree entirely.
Rick,
Oh, yeah.
if you don't mind me,
Professor. It
if you
has
don't mind
to
me
be.
Go ahead.
finishing up with what
Yeah,
I originally
absolutely.
started with, the fact that Professor Fisher feels that individual cities are not able to set their own standards for adopting medical marijuana within the community seems a fly in the face of all the communities that already have adopted all of these standards.
You're coming from it from the opposite standpoint. You're
just gonna
saying
address the guy's-
a community that is authorizing something that state law prohibits. That's what you're suggesting.
Charlie, as a trial lawyer,
They
I was
can't do
always
that.
taught when
Neil.
the judge or jury had a question, we tried to focus on the judge or jury's question. And to answer the writer's question, if somebody went to a dispensary who was a patient, a lawful dispensary, and they acquired marijuana, and then they walked out and they sold that marijuana on the street to someone that was not a medical marijuana patient, or just sold it to someone on the street, then that person should be prosecuted.
Absolutely true.
Period.
Charlie,
But period, that's it. That's the
Bill
answer.
Dwyer.
You want me to answer?
I think that-
Hasn't
that's-
hasn't the Court of Appeals already ruled that they're illegal?
Yeah.
Closed down?
Not at all.
Is that
See,
right?
that's a problem right there.
Not
That is the
one
problem.
bit.
The Court of Appeals didn't say that. They said patient-to-patient transfers where there's money involved
That's
is not
illegal.
allowed. There are still 3 other types of transfers that they acknowledge that they chose not to get to. So the law enforcement training that I'm asking for as to really understand what the Court of Appeals is saying is not
Charlie,
there.
the Court
I'm
of
sure the training
Appeals,
is there.
I'll just tell you right now, the Court of Appeals has outlawed 99% of the dispensaries because most of them are operating for profit.
Why are you coming up
They
with
are
these
operating for
statistics that you're
profit.
just making up at the moment?
And I'm proud to say that in Royal Oak, we have a enlightened and progressive city commission that has passed zoning ordinances, so we don't have dispensaries and grow houses. So we haven't had a lot of arrests.
Do you have medical
because-
marijuana?
Huh?
Do you have
We
medical
don't have
marijuana?
dispensaries and grow houses.
Having been to
They have a
those
ro-
council
Have-
commission
have-
meetings,
Professor,
I can
about
tell you,
that.
Mike,
enlightened
Royal
is
Oak
not
City
what I
is
would
around
Can
there.
the
describe Royal
cities
Oak.
disregard completely state law? That's a better question, which is what we're hearing.
Can the cities disregard state law?
Absolutely not. But the way Mr. Semchinas described that, it doesn't disregard state law. It's working within state law.
It does prohibit anyone from
Rick-
inside, it prohibits any patient that lives inside Royal Oak from possessing cannabis, from possessing medical marijuana, and be able to use that as their doctors
Actually, Rick,
recommended.
Well,
The
that's
Royal
not what
Oak-
he said.
that's
That's not what he
The
said.
Royal Oak ordinance actually doesn't prohibit people from possessing
Right.
marijuana. The Royal Oak ordinance prohibits patients from cultivating or growing their own marijuana in their own
dispensaries.
home. Yeah, but forget about dispensaries. We're not talking about that. We're talking about
Dispensaries are the
basic
worst
principle.
horror that's
Just
developed
the
in this,
basic
under this whole
principle
law.
of the
The
law.
worst-
gone now.
Let's just
The
talk
worst
about the
horror
Most cities
patients.
have
that's
taken a
developed.
moratorium.
Just talk about the
Position
patients.
on it. Most cities have taken a moratorium. They're doing
Just talk about the
nothing.
patients.
We
Be
did a
it Farmington
moratorium for
Hills
a
or
period of
Warren.
time. Then
Chuck,
we
is a
passed
pa-
this
just
law,
answer the question,
and it's
Chuck.
been very effective.
Chuck, is a cancer
Cities
patient-
have a choice.
Chuck, is a
because
cancer
the state law
simple-
gives us a
Chuck,
choice. We exercise that choice.
You're going to answer the question.
Professor
period.
Fisher said
Will
state law
somebody
gives
please
you no
write in
choice.
online
No
and express
choice,
to
Professor
Chuck
Fisher
Antietam
said. You can
248-589-7778,
You certainly
theopenpress.com.
no choices are available to
Steve
local
Fry,
communities
Steve
whatsoever.
Fry, you've got another question there, Steve.
Yes, Rick in Royal Oak asked, why not put this back on the ballot and let the voters decide?
Excellent choice.
Why would you? What you don't want? You're not in favor of that, Neil,
I
are
don't
you?
care. Whatever the voters want is what they get. I don't care.
Well, they got it.
I think the
Bill
voters,
Dwyer.
first of all, were misled. I think they felt that it was for terminally ill people. They were misled.
Yeah,
Who
but
are
I'm-
these? Who are these?
hang on,
Everyone that
Bill.
loses
all
an
read
election-
62%.
Everyone that
read the
loses
same
an election
language.
says that.
But I'm
Right
a
now, the
voter.
numbers are
I'm not dumb.
70%
I
of
knew what
people
I
that
was
are in
voting
favor.
for.
We all
Mike,
read the
The
ballot.
reality is this: you've got the medical marijuana community, and you've got this other group that are opposing it, which are in the minority. Then you got the rest of the state that is in favor of it. It's now at 70%. You don't think this economy in Michigan wants law enforcement to stop wasting its resources and put it towards something more productive? Seriously.
Charlie, how's this? How's this? 63% of the general public voted in favor of the Medical Marijuana Act. 34% opposed it, right? The 34% are currently the ones who are administering and enforcing the Medical Marijuana Act. In a lot of ways, that's true.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Are
Chuck,
you?
you disagree?
Did you vote for it?
60-some
vote
people.
Did you vote
I
for
read
it?
it, so I voted against it.
Ah, okay.
I wanted to be.
I'll tell you right now. 34%.
And I
You're
agree.
trying
I
to
agree.
enforce it.
People voted for medical marijuana, but I go back to my statement. I don't think we have a medical marijuana law. There's a disconnect, I think, between what people think they were voting for and what's buried in
You're
this
right.
law and with the
Chuck,
interpretations that have resulted.
Hold on, Chuck. Would you look at the
Neil,
camera and
Neil.
tell your citizenry in Royal Oak that you think that they're dumb? Because that's what you're saying to your citizenry.
It's a
You're
stupid
saying-
question, Neil. What I'll
But
tell
you're
the
saying to your
citizens in Royal Oak-
citizenry,
I'll
this
tell
man
the
thinks you're
citizens of
dumb.
Royal Oak
He
right
thinks
now
you're dumb.
that when they came to the podium,
He thinks you're dumb.
and with hundreds of them coming to the podium before we voted on this ordinance, that I followed their direction and I voted the way they wanted.
He thinks you're dumb.
All right.
63% of you voted for it, and he says
Steve,
that you
all
were
right,
misled.
theoaklandpress.com is the number. We have a couple
Royal
moments
Oak.
left. Steve Fry, I know that you've got another comment over there. Steve?
From an audience.
Hi, I'm sorry, it's me again.
It's still Ohio State, though.
My shirt again, but I see the feathers are all up, and you guys are very passionate. Because I'm just a person and I don't get to do this every day. I have questions, and I just asked who are you protecting, and no one answered. I'm just curious as to why, because if a veteran should if you can save 50 kids from not getting in trouble by denying a veteran his cannabis, veterans have sacrificed a lot and they're willing to do it. But you need to be able to tell them who you're protecting by taking it away. And that's if you could answer that, I'd really appreciate
I'm
it.
protecting patients and caregivers. I think you mean that question for Bill Dwyer and for Mr. Fisher and Chuck Simchina. He's protecting a figurative somebody.
I'm protecting residents
Generality.
and children in my mind.
Who specifically?
Everyone has a mother or a grandmother living somewhere in the city. There's rental houses on every street, and any 18-year-old could go out there and rent a house and start growing dope, and who knows
That's
what kind
can,
of trouble's
could,
gonna happen.
may, possible.
But there isn't any proof
concern
of
you
it.
have is
Bill.
the black market.
It's right there.
As I said
Specific.
before, you got people in the business now, not compassionate people trying to help out people that are terminally ill, people that want to make big bucks.
But do you really
And
think
that's
there's any
what's happening out there,
difference,
making big
though?
bucks.
But is there
There's
really
better
any
ways.
difference, though, when we have a medical marijuana law than what it was when we didn't have a medical marijuana law?
What's happening right now as far as the medical marijuana at dispensaries, it's like illegally selling heroin and cocaine because they're making big profits at
There's
it.
nothing-
Some of them.
that's-
I'm not
listen.
saying some of them.
Here you go.
Bill, you probably
There's
support
nothing-
gun
Mike,
rights, but
Mike,
gun
Mike,
manufacturers
Mike,
produce
Mike,
a
better
product that can hurt
solution.
people.
There's a better
Just saying you
solution.
got a
Go
black
ahead.
You
market
have a
there.
number of
You got
people that
in
are
it
medical
that makes a
marijuana
profit
patients
not to help
who are
people.
trying to be transparent. They are coming into a city and they're trying to be transparent. Come in, police, see what we're doing. We want to show you what we are trying to do. Helping sick people, having them come in, checking cards. That's what these dispensers are doing. And they're being treated like they're criminals. And there's been no change. It's just going into dispensaries, calling them criminals. There's been no movement on the opposite side to try to come to the medical marijuana community and understand and find a
We've
middle
had
ground.
Convictions. We've had people plea out.
That is turning people that have good intentions without any criminal intent into criminals and putting them in
Why
jail.
would they plea out?
I'll tell you why they plea out, Bill.
Because you
Hold on, I'll tell you why they plea
Professor,
out.
go ahead.
Hold on,
Charlie
Jerry, they plea out
Langton
because they're
ought to
scared.
Assemble a
They're
group
scared.
to
But they got
negotiate
attorneys
this.
representing them.
But they're scared.
Mr. Langton,
I would
turn it
take on the
They don't wanna go
challenge.
to prison.
I would love the challenge.
I
All
understand
right,
that.
we've got about 5 minutes left. Steve Fry, I'm going to give it to you. I know you've got some comments over there from the OaklandPress.com. Steve Fry.
Someone asked, well, there were several people commenting about when you were talking about the children, about the difference between alcohol and marijuana, noting the ease with which people can buy booze when they're underage. But someone else asked, with the outbreak of new designer drugs and all the rest of the narcotics, how has it become a priority for law enforcement to become concerned with my medicine?
Bill Dwyer.
We're enforcing the law. They have a responsibility, as I said earlier. It's a catch-22. If we get information, an investigation has to be conducted, and that's what your law enforcement people are doing. They're conducting an investigation based on information received. It would be the same thing with any other type of crime.
But there's a
And
difference
in
between a
many
knock
cases,
and talk and a
information
SWAT
withheld.
tactics,
Right,
Information
exactly.
withheld. That's the problem.
But the SWAT
You know,
tactics
sometimes,
are
Charlie,
approached.
the people who are in power, who have the discretion to conduct an investigation or not, they don't have to. They get word that there's someone who's never been a
If
problem
you're
before.
speeding, you don't have to be
They don't
pulled
have
over.
to, but they get
There's
word that
discretion,
there's
but if they see it,
some little old lady who they don't go ask any neighbors. They don't ask the neighbor if the person next door has appeared to suffer or have a cane or walks with a walker. They get a search warrant and then they go kick in the door and then
But they can only get the search warrant if they got probable cause. So they've conducted their
But
investigation.
that's not a very tough standard. I mean,
Well,
that's a pretty low.
You're just
How about
not gonna
this?
sign a judge's not going to sign a
Why
search
don't you add
warrant.
this?
talk
How
instead
about
of
this?
using
Why
SWAT
not add a
tactics? How's that?
second layer that
Neil.
if you establish probable cause, why not have a second layer that actually, instead of police having access to the medical marijuana database, why don't you have a second judge that the police have to take their search warrant to, or their affidavit to, and have a second judge who has
want
private
more
access.
bureauctress? You got more
No,
going
no,
on.
no, no, no,
no,
if you trust the
There
judge
you go.
so much-
Instead of disseminating
Instead of.
patients who were promised
Instead of.
that their information would be kept private, as the legislation that's pending right now would have
Why
that
not just
disseminate
change
to
the
law
law and
enforcement.
put it in a
You know, I had said
pharmacy?
earlier
Now you've
that-
got-
I
Build
had
one,
said
because you
earlier
can't- there's
that
not
net
federally
narcotic
workable
enforcement
with it.
team conducted
That's
over
what our
100 search
visit to
warrants.
Obama is going
They
to do.
conducted over 100 search warrants on private homes. They were conducted because neighbors were calling in. They were seeing people coming and going from that home. So the
Which
law
home?
enforcement conducted the investigation, had probable cause to execute the search warrant and arrest those people.
Which case?
Let me do- all right,
There was
hold on,
100
hold on,
search
hold
warrants
on. In the
executed.
remaining moments,
so
hold on.
many of these cases.
All right,
That
hold
is
on.
not
In the
the
remaining
case.
moments that we have left, we only have a couple minutes. I'm going to go around the panel right here. If you were king of the world, you had the power to make the Medical Marijuana Act anything you wanted. The biggest change, one change that you could make that would help this cause. I'm going to start over here. Rick Thompson, Medical Marijuana Magazine.
That the medical marijuana cards, once issued by the state, are noble to law enforcement. The possession of the card means exactly what the act says, that you must release this person without prejudice if they're in possession of an amount of marijuana that's legitimately allowed. That card should be honored the way that the law originally states it should be.
So no real change, no major change in the law then.
Well, let's put pictures on the cards. Let's fix the doctor-patient relationship so we can't do Skype approvals. But other than that, let's keep it solid.
Michael Cremorne.
I'd like law enforcement and Chuck specifically to spend some time with sick people that have gained benefits from using cannabis. So they saw how they've gone from using an enormous amount of opiates to none at all, or curing skin cancer with use of Simpson oil. These are real stories. These are real stories, and unless you hear it from the people and listen to them and how they've benefited, you're not really getting it. And that's what needs to be done by the opponents.
Bill Dwyer.
I have compassion for those people that are suffering, terminally ill or otherwise. But I just don't think that this medical marijuana law is going to be effective. There's THC tablets that you can actually get prescriptions for from your doctor.
Professor Joe Fisher.
Only one change, right?
Real quick, one change, quickly.
Only one change. I would more specifically define those individuals that are entitled to certification with the opportunity to petition for additional.
Neil Rockine, defense attorney.
One change?
One change, that's it.
Every case in which there's a medical marijuana card or certification, the defendant gets to mention the Medical Marijuana Act and gets his defense in front of a jury. Let the people decide.
Add Chuck Samchiel, final word.
Yes, I was a caregiver in truth for my father who died a slow, painful death. And if I could have obtained something that would have helped him from a pharmacy with a real doctor's prescription, I would have done it. So my dream world is to have a pharmaceutical setting with real doctor prescriptions. Anything else opens the door for the drug dealers to use this as a shield.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Panel, I thank you very much. Audience, I thank you. And of course, the people that have listened to this, I thank you as well. From all of us here at the Community Media Network, as well as at the Oakland Press, I'm Charlie Lighton. Thank you for tuning in to this live town hall meeting, Medical Marijuana Revisited. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.
That's not a pegboard tie, is it?
Of course.
Good to talk to you again.
I know it has to be.
Well, good job, Charlie. I thought you were going to give a half hour.